Hello, Dr. Myhill. I am so excited to have you here today. It's really good to have you on the podcast because I help midlife women, and a lot of them are chasing diets and all kinds of crazy things, and they don't understand what's really going on. So I'm very excited to have you here to share your story and to tell us what you do. So could you start with who are you? What do you
Okay.
do? And what's your perspective on carnivore?
Okay. Well, I'm a conventionally trained doctor, so I qualified in 1981, and I then spent 20 years working in the British National Health Service. And then by the late 1990s, I realized that I didn't have the tools I needed to be an effective doctor. And the reason for that was I was interested in looking for causation of disease. All my patients want to know, why have I got migraine? Why am I fatigued? Why do I have arthritis? And of course, the conventional medical treatment is symptom suppression with drugs. And symptom suppression with drugs is dangerous medicine because we have symptoms for very good reasons. They protect us from ourselves. So, and in fact, by the late 1990s, I was slapped on the wrist because my prescribing budget was so low, and that made me a bad doctor. Anyway, I learned much of my stuff through work with patients with fatigue syndromes, chronic fatigue syndrome and ME, one of the worst treated conditions in Western medicine. There's real pathology there. It's microscopic pathology. And I wrote 3 papers about this in the 2000s and 2011. I've increasingly come to view that there are 2 major drivers of all Western pathology. One is poor energy delivery mechanisms, and the other is inflammation. And I'm increasingly coming to the view that we all need to do it all. Because in the early 1980s, it was relatively easy to get people well. They cut out the dairy products, or they cut out the gluten grains or whatever, and you get great results. But we live in an increasingly toxic world. The food is toxic. It's ultra-processed food and carbohydrate heavy. Because of that, we have an upper fermenting gut, and that's toxic to us. We are all poisoned by chemicals, volatile organic compounds, and pesticides. We are all poisoned by heavy metals. So what I'm interested in now is the most frictionless route to recovery. And I always start with energy delivery mechanisms. And the analogy I like to use is, for good energy for the body, you've got to have it's the car analogy. You've got to have the right fuel in the tank. You've got to have some oxygen. That's all about breathing. Then you need the mitochondrial engine, and that's my special area of interest, the thyroid accelerator pedal, and the adrenal gearbox. And if any one of those things is down, then you will be fatigued. And guess who is most often affected? And that's, women in their 50s and their 60s, and they're told, oh, it's because you're old. Oh, it's because you're in the menopause, all this sort of tripe. And it's very, very frustrating for them. And there are very few good doctors who are really prepared to address causation. So it always starts with the diet. And the reason, there are many ways in which a diet can cause fatigue. And the reason I love starting people off with the carnivore diet is because it's low allergen. Allergy, when you get allergic to, and the 3 common things are gluten grains, dairy products, and yeast. When you get allergic to those and you have symptoms, that drives inflammation, and inflammation kicks a hole in the energy bucket. So we straight away have less energy. The second reason a carnivore diet is so good is because if you look at life from the point of view of a plant, it doesn't want to be eaten. The vast majority of plants out there in the natural world are toxic to us. They're too poisonous for us to consume. And those that we do consume, it's not that they're non-toxic or non-poisonous. It's just they have less toxins and fewer poisons in them. And so our livers can cope with that. And on balance, there are potential benefits. And the third reason why a carnivore diet is so wonderful is because it's very low in carbohydrates. And that's important for 2 reasons. Because first, the evolutionary correct fuel for our mitochondria are ketones. So we need to do a ketogenic diet. And secondly, if you have a high carbohydrate diet, and especially if you're eating regularly, and the trouble with carbohydrates, they're very addictive. And guess what? I'm an addict. And I find the only way I can deal with my addiction is not have any of them. So with carbohydrates, people get to eat them in an addictive way. Breakfast, snack mid-morning, lunch, snack mid-afternoon, supper, the munches in the evening. And so the gut never gets a chance to clean itself up. And we overwhelm the ability of the upper gut, by which I mean the first 25 foot of that tube that connects the mouth to the anus. You end up with an upper fermenting gut. And that causes a whole host of problems. First of all, if you're fermenting food, then you're producing gas, and that can cause burping and bloating and heartburn. Secondly, if you are fermenting, you ferment those foods to a whole range of toxins like ethyl alcohol, propyl alcohol, butyl alcohol, ammonarchal compounds, D-lactate, hydrogen sulfur, all these things, which are poisonous. And so the liver has a big job to do to detoxify those. And the business of detoxification is very demanding of energy and raw materials. The microbes themselves that are fermenting away, the bacteria and the yeast. If you look at life from the point of view of one of those, they don't want some other basket case, moving into its comfortable ecological space where it's well fed, well watered, and can have, sex ad lib. So all those fungi and all those bacteria, they produce their own toxins, fungal mycotoxins, bacterial endotoxins, and they're all toxic as well. But I think another major driver of pathology comes from the microbes themselves, because they do spill over into the bloodstream. They do get stuck at distal sites, and that drives a whole heap of pathology like myocarditis, arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, Reiter syndrome, urticaria, inflammatory bowel disease, intrinsic asthma, eczema, a whole range of conditions. And so now, once you have a grasp on the mechanisms of disease, that has obvious implications for management. And to treat the upper fermenting gut, very simple. First of all, stop feeding it. So we start with the carnivore diet, yippee. And secondly, kill the little wretches with vitamin C, 5 grams a day. Lugol's iodine, 15%, start low, build up to 3 drops a day, and then maybe 1 drop a day, long-term maintenance. So as you've probably gathered, the carnivore diet is absolutely central to the prevention and treatment of a whole host of conditions. But the thing I really like about the carnivore diet is in the early days when I was just interested in allergy, or rather that was the main thing on my radar, the typical diet would be the lamb, pears and rice diet. And I had a few patients who did a lamb, pears and rice diet and ended up stuck on that diet. Whatever food they introduced, they reacted to. The joy of the carnivore diet, meat, fish, eggs, is that you can eat that for life and remain perfectly healthy. So it's a great diet. It's a great starting point. So I'm so pleased that you're an advocate as well.
Yes, I've been carnivore. It's coming up my 3-year anniversary or carniversary. And I have so many questions. I have sticky notes all over the front of my computer now. And this is not going down the avenue of my questions. They're still here. Tell me what ME stands for.
Encephalomyelitis. So it's both chronic fatigue syndrome and ME are characterized by fatigue. Chronic fatigue syndrome is the clinical picture of poor energy delivery mechanisms. ME is the clinical picture of poor energy delivery mechanisms and inflammation, which may be for reasons of allergy, autoimmunity, or chronic infection.
Okay, so do you believe in the high-fat carnivore? I'm going to go there first.
Of course, 100%. Whenever you have a difficult question like that, what diet should I do? Should I do the FODMAPs diet or the vegan diet, the vegetarian or whatever? Always go back to evolutionary biology, because we evolved over hundreds of thousands, nay, millions of years as carnivores. We evolved because we were carnivore, not to become carnivore. It's only in the last 10,000 years or so that we started to farm and to milk animals and to grow vegetables and all that sort of thing. And yes, it's provided more calories so that we have famine, is less common. But in that time, our brains have shrunk. We are not so clever. My guess is we are not so physically fit as we used to be, but we are great survivors because we have this amazing organ which is called the brain, and that gets around many problems. These days, I have to say, I'm not pure carnivore, I'm meat heavy. The reason for that is I'm a keen gardener, and so I grow lots of green vegetables and a few berries. So that is the essence of my diet. It's meat, green vegetables, salad, avocado, a few berries, and then coconut milk, which is my milk alternative. So that's the staple. That's what my diet is comprised of, essentially.
When you talked about vitamin C, so can someone use vitamin C that's on carnivore?
Of course. I mean, the point about vitamin C is, carnivores, people eating carnivore don't get scurvy. So they are getting sufficient vitamin C for normal metabolism. But the awful thing is we don't live in a normal world anymore. And if I have somebody who's been consuming any amount of sugars and carbohydrates, almost certainly they will have an upper fermenting gut. And vitamin C is a great treatment to kick off killing those microbes in the gut. So the strategy is you stop feeding them with sugars and carbohydrates, the carnivore, and then kill them with vitamin C. And the joy of vitamin C is it contact kills all microbes. So that's why I call it the upper fermenting gut. I don't think, is this small bowel bacterial overgrowth? Is this a candida problem or whatever? It doesn't matter, because vitamin C, contact kills all. And of course, my preferred form of vitamin C is ascorbic acid. It's an
Hmm.
acid. The stomach should be an acid bath. Why? Because that is that helps us to digest protein very efficiently, but B, that is a major defense against disease, because 90% of infection comes in through the mouth and the nose, through eating and through breathing. Obviously, what we eat or what we drink should drop into an acid bath and be sterilized. So any microbes entering by that route get killed off in the stomach. Microbes that we inhale, the rhinoviruses, respiratory viruses, coronavirus, they should get stuck onto sticky mucus in the nose and the throat, coughed up and swallowed. So they too end up in an acid bath. So not only is vitamin C a great treatment for the upper fermenting gut, it's also highly protective against infection. I haven't had a cold or a flu for about 35 years, because at the first hint of any sniffle, sore throat, the early symptoms, I take vitamin C to bowel tolerance. Now, this is a very well-established technique, beloved of naturopathic physicians, and I take 10 grams every hour. That's 2 teaspoons every hour. Now, you might think, oh, that's a lot of vitamin C. But the first point is, vitamin C has never killed anybody. It is completely safe stuff. Secondly, the severity of an infection is determined by the loading dose of bacteria or virus. And you don't want to wait around to see how bad your infection is to determine the loading dose. You just take big dose of vitamin C. And you keep taking 10 grams every hour until you start to get bowel symptoms. Now, the point here is that the body will absorb from the gut the vitamin C that it needs to shoot infections. Vitamin C is essentially the ammunition with which our immune army guns down viruses and bacteria and yeast. And once the body is saturated with vitamin C, the rest of it will remain in the gut. Then it travels down the gut to the large bowel, where it starts to kill off some of the friendly microbes. Now, the first symptom of that is a rumble in the tummy. So if you feel the tummy, brrr. The second symptom is foul-smelling wind, because vitamin C kills off some of the friendly microbes, which then get fermented by other friendly microbes to produce hydrogen sulfate. That's the stink bomb gas smell from chemistry at school, isn't it? And then if you go on taking vitamin C, then you start to kill off more microbes and you will get diarrhea. But one of my favorite doctors, who is a great advocate of vitamin C, is a guy called Dr. Frederick Klenner, who was working in the 1940s and the 50s and the 60s. And he used to say, in any acute condition, all patients should receive large doses of vitamin C whilst the physician ponders the diagnosis. And that makes the point that there's a time element here. If you hang around and think, well, I'll try a little bit. I'll try a bit more. It's too late. The microbe has outstripped. It's won the arms race, and you're going to progress to full-blown flu or cold. So be bold, 10 grams every hour. My experience is, for me, 40 grams, that's 4 hours of 10 grams an hour, usually kills it. And when you get the correct dose of vitamin C, you feel completely well. The symptoms just disappear. Wonderful paper detailing this, Medical Hypotheses, 1981, by Robert Cathcart, explains the bowel tolerance mechanism of taking vitamin C. And it's a fantastic tool.
I know that vitamin C can really go straight through you, but I didn't know this process. So you're saying to me, your tolerance is 40 grams over a 4-hour period, and then you just feel well after that? It's just
Correct.
gone?
Correct.
Why haven't we heard of this
And there's
before?
another reason why this is very, very important. One of the books I wrote was called The Infection Game. And of course, I researched that at length. And what I found out is I couldn't find a pathology, dementia, heart disease, or cancer, that didn't have either an infectious associate or an infectious driver. So the point here is, at the first hint of any infection, we want to get rid of the little wretch before it makes itself comfortably at home in our body and becomes a permanent residence with the potential to drive disease. So, for example, we know testing positive for Helicobacter pylori, which is an upper gut fermenter. We know that's a risk factor for stomach cancer. Any of the herpes viruses, many of them drive neurological diseases. Epstein-Barr virus, which causes, I think you guys call it mono, we know that is a driver of breast cancer. We know many of the herpes viruses associated with dementia. So this is why it's so important to avoid infections, and at the first hint of any symptoms, get rid of little wretches before they install themselves in your body and start to cause long-term problems.
So is there any hope once they have made a home to change
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely. Because what we have to do is we have to look after our immune system. And our immune system conducts immune surveillance. So it's constantly going around the body. I mean, throughout life, we produce 10,000 DNA mutations every second. And some of those are going to morph into cancers. And what protects us from that is the immune system going around, saying, gobbling up this, gobbling up that, and it'd be gobbling up any virus that gets out of hand, any broken down cells or ancient cells or cell debris that's lurking, and of course, gobbling up cancer cells. So we have to look after our immune system. And guess what? The immune system needs lots of energy to do that. So we're back to energy delivery mechanisms. Keto diet, of course, is really important. And it needs the raw materials to do that. Because when the immune system is busy doing things, that's called inflammation. And it needs lots of vitamins, lots of minerals, essential fatty acids, vitamin C, iodine, and so on, so that it can work really well.
I've heard of 5% Lugol's iodine. I have never heard of 15%. Where do you get
Well,
this from?
Well, we stock it here. It doesn't matter. If you've got 5%, you just use 3 times the dose. So very straightforward. But Lugol's iodine is one of the very early medicines that was developed in the 18th century. And it has a multiplicity of actions. In fact, the discoverer of vitamin C, Sven Gorzi, said when he was a medical student in the 1920s, there was a little ditto they used to sing, "If ye know not the where and why, prescribe you then K and I, i.e. potassium and iodine, which is Lugol's iodine." It's just the most fantastic tool. And the problem is, as I'm sure you're aware, is that medicine is now being completely run by Big Pharma. And Big Pharma has drug strategies for any symptom or disease that you care to list. And there's lots of money there. So the last thing that Big Pharma want is peasants like you and me curing themselves with cheap, effective naturopathic interventions. They want lots of people, sick with heart disease, sick with cancer, sick with dementia, so they can peddle their frightfully expensive drugs. It's the old story, always follow the money. In fact, the overall strategy that big government it plays along with is you want peasants like you and me working our little hearts out on the back of addictions, alcohol, fags, cheap carbohydrates, so they can make loads of money at those things. So we work our little hearts out and then we drop dead before we get to a pensionable age, because guess what? The pension pots are fast shrinking. There's not enough money to go around. And in this country, I don't know if it's like in America, but life expectancy is now falling. Why? Because of poor quality diets, micronutrient deficiencies, poisons, toxic stress, etc., which is driving all this pathology.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a really deep question for a moment. So is there a difference in the body between simple sugar, which is carbs, sugar, junk food, grains, seed oils, like all the processed junk, and natural sugars?
No, they're the same thing. It's a question of amount. I mean, some sugar in our body is essential. Sugar is essential as the raw material to make DNA, to make RNA, to make ATP. And we also use a little bit of sugar for the business of detoxing in the liver. That's called glucuronidation. But the problem is sugar from our evolutionary past was in short supply. It was only available in the autumn. And of course, humans evolved. I'm jumping sideways now, so forgive me. But humans evolved in Africa when there was I'm a great fan of Elaine Morgan's theory that the aquatic ape, i.e. we evolved in water. So chimpanzees moved into water. Water made them buoyant, so they could stand upright on 2 legs. The nose became turned down so that when we put our head underwater, we don't drown. So I put a chimpanzee underwater, he will quickly drown because the water pours in. And we lost our hair because hair is an encumbrance in water. So we developed subcutaneous fat instead. And then when we came out of the sea, that put us in. And of course, we were eating large amounts of shellfish and sea fish, which is rich in iodine, DHA, and EPA, which is essential for the brain. So the brains of those aquatic apes grew very rapidly. So the chimpanzee brain was 350 mils, a few million years ago, and it's 350 milliliters today. Our brains, at one stage, they were 1,700 milliliters in size. Now they're about 1,450. They've shrunk a little. But the point is, with those brains, being on 2 legs, we developed hands, which of course are the most fantastic tools. You can do so much with your hands that, an animal with paws or a cloven-hoofed animal simply can't do. And we returned to the land and became very successful hunters. So we evolved as I say, hunters, as carnivores. And then came the problem. As we migrated away, north, away from the equator, we had the problem of winter, how to survive winter, less food around. And of course, in the autumn comes an autumn harvest, nuts, seeds, berries, fruits, grains, all those foods, and they're all carbohydrate foods. Now, what that did, so in order to survive the winter, our best evolutionary strategy is to eat and eat and eat, so we become fat. And what drove us to do that was the carbohydrate addiction gene that was switched on in the autumn, which meant when you start eating sugars and carbohydrates, you can't stop. You eat and you eat and you eat, which is highly desirable. You get fat, that's survival value for the winter. And in parallel with that, what you don't want is to get all those extra foods and then rush off and play golf and hockey and cricket and burn off all those precious calories. So parallel with that, those foods make us fatigued. So we get tired, we get foggy-brained, we get fat, which is to say all survival value for the winter. Now, of course, when winter comes along, those foods disappear. They're no longer on the menu. They've all rotted. And so we're into hibernation mode. And yes, we would go out hunting. But the point about when we are in hibernation mode, we're running on our own fat reserves. We are in ketosis. And being in ketosis makes us clever, makes the brain work better, and it gives us more energy. So we know that endurance athletes can perform at much higher levels when they are running on ketones rather than sugars and carbohydrates. So they are a fantastically valuable food. And then of course, we'd have the occasional hunt. Hopefully, it allows us to survive the winter, and then the cycle will start all over again. But it illustrates the point that carbohydrates are addictive by design. We all have that carbohydrate addiction gene. And the problem with modern times is that with our amazing farming systems we have and supermarkets, we can eat carbohydrates all year round. And so the carbohydrate gene never gets turned off. We're in constant, sugar and carbohydrate craving. We can turn it off, of course, by avoiding them. I have my own personal carbohydrate addiction test, which tells me if I can have a food in the house or if it's too dangerous. And that is, if I can have one bit of and not the rest, that's okay. So I wouldn't dare have a bar of 75% chocolate in the house because I'd have one square and the whole bar would disappear. I wouldn't dare have a bag of cashew nuts in the house because I'd have one cashew nut and the whole packet would disappear. So I make sure I have in the house foods which I love, but I can have one or two of, and I don't want any more. So if I get the munchies in the evening, I'll just have walnuts, just crack a few walnuts. And by the time I've done 4 or 5, I'm fed up with that and give up on that one. Dark chocolate, for example, if I sometimes have a square of dark chocolate, but it passes my addiction test because I have one square and I don't want any more. So olives, salami, all those things are great snacks to have around that say pass my personal addiction test.
So let me just say, I respect your beliefs, but some of my listeners are believers, so they don't believe that. So I just want to clarify that we still weren't made to eat a bunch of sugar and a bunch of junk food and a bunch of carbs. Let me ask you this. Do you believe in epigenetics and how we can turn on or turn off genes based on how we eat and how we live?
Of course. I wouldn't count myself an expert in the subject, but epigenetics, are a fantastic way by which we can fine tune our genes and our bodies and our metabolism to deal with the prevailing problems, whether that's a harsh winter or a window of time of starvation or a window of time of plenty. The environment is constantly changing. We have to change our metabolism and our actions in order to give us the best chance of survival. And yes, I'm sure epigenetics are centrally important for that.
Yes. So let's go back to cancer for a moment. I have a relative, my father, who has metastatic prostate cancer, and we put him on carnivore in the very beginning. And he was super strict, and everyone got upset. They said I was trying to kill him and that we needed, and I'm just telling the truth here, but we needed to let him eat whatever he wants and be comfortable. We went to Mexico and he got a lot of treatments, a lot of natural things, and came home doing great. So he got sick in June of 2023, and I had just found carnivore. I'll talk about why in a moment. And so I just told him, I was like, look, this is what I found. This is what I think will help you. Well, then he did that. He was doing really well. And then he was on testosterone blockers, Lupron and Zometa and something else. And he almost died that December. And so he just was like, I can't do Lupron anymore. So I said, great, and a friend of ours lives locally that's energetic naturopath. And so she said, why don't you go to Mexico? And I was like, oh, that sounds scary and all these things. And then we just made it happen. We couldn't leave until around April of the next year. So we continued doing carnivore, and then we got there, and the agreement was I'd be able to eat carnivore when I got there and that they would supply it and it would all work out and I would pay for my food. Well, I got there and they were like, yeah, we're not doing carnivore for you, and he can't do carnivore anymore. And so they took him off carnivore. But based on the way that they built his meals, he didn't have gluten, he didn't have dairy. And so we were there 30 days and then we came home and everything was fine for that year. And he had a PET scan in January of that year, so 2024. And we didn't get a PET scan until 2025. He had gone back to like sweet potatoes, steamed apples. He was eating green beans, I think, at that point. He was still eating some red meat, but mostly it was like chicken and stuff. Then fast forward, he did that for 6 months. And then I was like, because I'm a health coach, I'm a master health coach, and I'm deeply into nutrition and really want to just help him and save him. And so then at December, because he had kind of gone a little bit off and things were going different. So in December, he was on testosterone blockers. So in Mexico, they put him on 2 that combine well without side effects. So anyway, to January, we get another PET scan, and did we get a PET scan? No, we got a PET scan in January of 2025. So he was good. And then this year, his cancer has moved. So it had died on all of his bones, and it basically almost disappeared on his prostate. Now it's in his abdomen and it's in his lymph nodes. So my thing is, I'm like, Dad, you can't eat natural sugar. Natural sugar is like eating sugar. Your body doesn't know the difference. So they've decided to send me some Google searches that say all of that's good for cancer patients, including milk. And I'm like, let's just do an experiment. Let's see if what you're doing works or if it kills them. If it kills him, I was right. If he gets better, I was wrong. But he's been doing this for a while and he's only gotten worse. So my concern is there's nothing I can do. I've learned you can't make people do anything, but education is key. But I would love to hear your take on that and carnivore, because they were like, he can't be on carnivore because it feeds testosterone and it feeds the prostate cancer.
It's complete rubbish. We have known since the 90s from the work of Otto Warburg, and this is called the Warburg effect, that what makes cancer cells different from normal cells is the fuel that they consume. And the bottom line is cancer cells can only run on sugar. So this is why diabetics who run a high blood sugar have a much higher risk of cancer than people who have normal levels of blood sugar, because sugar feeds the cancer. The logical treatment is to stop feeding those cancer cells with sugar and eat a ketogenic diet. In fact, you'll probably know the case of a wonderful young man called Andrew Scarborough, who had a brain tumor, a glioblastoma. Now, the life expectancy for a glioblastoma is about 13 months. The conventional treatment is next to useless. In parallel with this glioblastoma, he actually presented with very severe epilepsy. The drugs didn't control the epilepsy, and he read that a ketogenic diet is a great way to treat epilepsy. So he put himself on a very strict carnivore ketogenic diet. So very, very high fat, normal amounts of protein for his body requirements. It's not a high protein diet. And what's so fascinating is not only did his epilepsy disappear, but his glioblastoma stopped growing. So here he is now, 10 years later, fit and well, functioning at a high level. Yes, still doing the same diet, having had no conventional therapy. So that just illustrates, it's just one case history, I know, and I know one swallow doesn't make a summer. But the most important thing to hang on to is cancer cells can only run on sugar. And the best way to treat cancer is not to get it in the first place. And that's why, a carnivore ketogenic diet is such a great start. The difficulty with a carnivore diet is consuming sufficient fat, because it's not a high protein diet. Yes, we need some protein, obviously, and yet some protein can be converted to sugars. But it's the key thing is consuming enough fat. So fatty meats, get the cheapest cuts you can possibly find that are full of sinew and collagen, which is also great for the body as well. A carnivore diet would be great for your dad. I know Thomas Seyfried reckons that glutamine will feed cancer cells.
Mhm.
But it's very difficult to do a low glutamine diet because all proteins contain glutamine. So the immune system is demanding and requires proteins and amino acids. So this is why it's a low protein diet is tricky. But the key thing is it's the sugars and the carbs. And you need to get into a good level of ketosis. So I like my patients to measure their ketones in the blood. It's a very simple blood test. You can do it just on a sample from your fist there. And never take blood tests from a finger because it destroys the little nerves in your finger and you end up losing sensation. So always, if you do a skin prick test, always do it from a pad of your from your hand. And for people just doing a normal, regular carnivore diet, to run ketones between zero 0.5 and 1 millimoles per liter is perfect. If you want to do ketosis in order to lose weight, then you need to aim for between 1 and 2. But my cancer patients, I like them to be between 2 and 3. So the ratio of blood sugar to ketones in the blood needs to be 2 to 1. So if your blood sugar is running at 5, then your ketones need to be at about 2.5. And that is very doable with a good carnivore diet.
Amazing. So let me tell you about what brought me to carnivore. So I actually became gluten, dairy, soy, peanut, and corn intolerant in 2010. And then in 2022, I went on a trip to Florida. And while there, I thought I was cross contaminated with gluten. I swole up, none of my clothes fit. I had to keep going to all these events the entire weekend, but it usually goes away after 3 days. So I get home, it never stopped. So I actually had histamine intolerant reaction to every single food I ate for 7 months. And then a friend of mine called me and he was plant based at the time. And he said, you should look up Michaela Peterson on Joe Rogan and watch that video and you should try carnivore. And I was like, meat? That sounds dangerous. What do you mean? And he's like, listen, don't listen to me. Just go do your homework. So I did that. And I actually did 60 hours of research on all of the experts and all of the women that were around my age that were doing carnivore to see if I could figure out how to do it safely. So I did that. It took 18 days for me to transition fuel sources and I like couldn't even hold my head up. It was so bad. I was so fatigued and so exhausted. So I went carnivore April 14th of 2023. And by July, I had found Dr. Bright and started working with her because come to find out, I had adrenal fatigue, which they don't call it that in this country. They call it adrenal insufficiency. Adrenal fatigue's made up. And then I had very low thyroid function. So I've been chasing that rabbit for a long time. I'm taking a lot of NDT and I was taking something for adrenal cortex, I believe. I
Perfect.
haven't taken that in a while. Is that good?
Yeah, great stuff.
Okay, so still dealing with all of that. So I've been chasing down the nervous system. So I want to know your take on how the nervous system is connected with maybe mitochondria and health and thyroid, adrenal, all of that.
I'm not sure what you mean by that. I mean, do you mean people who are anxious in a stress state?
So someone who is under a ton of stress and they're in
Sure.
fight or flight and they're sort of stuck there, could that have some effect on the adrenals and the thyroid? Is that something to worry about or work on?
Well, the point is, if you're in fight or flight mode, then that kicks a hole in the energy bucket and renders you more fatigued. But we have to ask the question, why that person is in fight or flight. And it's a common cause of this is what is called ketogenic hypoglycemia. It's a dreadful term, but the point here is we normally fat burn with thyroid hormones. Now, if you have an underactive thyroid and you haven't got the thyroid hormones to fat burn with, then you will fat burn with adrenaline instead. And that gives you the wired but tired symptoms, which are awful. So the underactive thyroid is very common and it often presents at the menopause. And the reason for that is that female sex hormones give us, as I call it, false energy. We have to have that false energy, for the business of procreation and child rearing. If you don't have a lot of energy for rearing children, then, you're going to struggle as a mother. And when those female sex hormones disappear at the menopause, if you have a thyroid that is less than perfect, then the symptoms of the underactive thyroid will be unmasked. And the primary symptom is, of course, fatigue and foggy brain. often weight gain, fluid retention, disturbed sleep, hair loss, loss of the outer eyebrows, thinning hair, many symptoms. And then what we have to do is do blood tests to see if there is biochemical scope for a trial of natural thyroid, which could be Armour thyroid or desiccated thyroid or whatever, and then start with very tiny doses and build up until you get to that sweet spot. I've actually written a book about it. It's called The Underactive Thyroid. And the subtitle, I don't know if you can see that, the subtitle is Do It Yourself Because Your Doctor Won't. And the shameful thing is, that is the case because the underactive thyroid is misdiagnosed and is undertreated. All doctors do is they measure a TSH, a thyroid stimulating hormone, and they make all their decisions on the basis of that. That is poor medicine. We have to make our decisions on the basis of what the clinical symptoms are, what the clinical signs are, slow pulse, low core temperature, for example, what the blood tests show us. But the real diagnosis comes from the response to treatment. And if by dint of gradually increasing the dose to a therapeutic, a reasonable level, that person feels much better, then you can say, yep, there's a problem there with an underactive thyroid, and that person is going to need thyroid hormones probably for life. It's at least probably 20%, maybe even 30% of the older population suffer from an underactive thyroid. And it's a very important diagnosis to make because not only do we need energy to be able to function, I see the whole of life from an energy perspective. Energy is like money. It's very hard work earning it, and it's great fun spending it. And so it is with energy. So we need that energy to have a life. But being underactive is a major risk factor for cancer, heart disease, and dementia. And of course, the drug companies want us all to be underactive. Why? Because then they can dish out all their expensive drugs for cancer, heart disease, and dementia. The government wants you to be underactive, so you'll die young and won't collect the pension because the pension pot is empty. So, it suits everybody except us peasants.
So true. So it's so frustrating because I think I've had a thyroid issue for a long time. But do you think that it's something that can turn around and can heal?
I've had a few people who have felt better for thyroid hormones, tried to reduce the dose, and eventually they relapse. So for the overwhelming majority, it's thyroid hormones for life. But the thyroid gland is very easily damaged. It lies in the neck. It's very susceptible to viral infections, which tend to come along in the autumn. But we are all poisoned by fluoride, which knocks out the thyroid. We're all poisoned by bromide because bromine compounds are used as fire retardants in furnishings. That knocks out the thyroid gland. We all have a load of heavy metals. I've done lots of tests for heavy metal toxicity. I've never found a normal test. Everybody is carrying a load of heavy metals of some description: lead, arsenic, mercury, cadmium, aluminium. They're the things that come up all the time, and they can all knock out the thyroid gland. We're seeing epidemics of autoimmunity, switched on by, dare I say it, the V word that we can't mention, otherwise the YouTube videos get taken down. And autoimmunity now probably afflicts maybe 1 in 5 people. And autoimmune thyroiditis is one of the commonest mechanisms by which the thyroid gets knocked off and is one of the commoner autoimmune diseases. So our thyroids are coming under us. And of course, on top of all that, most people are iodine deficient. And as we know, iodine is absolutely essential for the thyroid gland. So it's a perfect storm. The modern world is a perfect storm of nasties designed to knock out our thyroid glands and turn us into the myxodematous mad people that some want us to be.
It's so funny because they're attacking the thyroid and then they refuse to give more than 30 milligrams of any type of natural desiccated thyroid. So it's not like you can get treated here in this country, in the US.
It's just as bad in this country, I can assure you. And that's why I call the book Do It Yourself Because Your Doctor Won't. So you have to take charge of your own disease. You have to learn the symptoms. You have to educate yourself. You have to do the blood tests. And thankfully, we do have laboratories where you don't need a doctor. You can send bloods off and get them done yourself. You can interpret them and then start slowly and build up the dose very gently until you hit that optimum sweet spot, as I call it. You can overdose and that'll make you shaky and tremulous and can't sleep. So please don't do that. But let's say the book, The Underactive Thyroid, details exactly how you can do it yourself.
And so you can actually get natural desiccated thyroid?
In the appendix is a list of the world suppliers of natural desiccated thyroid. So anybody can access it themselves. It's fairly inexpensive. And believe you me, I've bought them all and tried them all, and they all contain active ingredients. So all those that are listed in the appendix do contain active ingredients.
Amazing. So what is your take on histamine, and can that be healed? I tried the lion diet for 2.5 months, and I can only eat one type of frozen burger patty. I can't eat anything else. So I'm eating that. And well, I went back on egg yolks, burger patties.
Okay.
I have decaf coffee, a little bit of decaf coffee with butter in it, and it's grass-fed butter and salt. That's it.
Well, I admire your discipline, but the point about histamine is not the cause. Histamine is the messenger. We have to go one step back and say, what's releasing the histamine? And histamine is a symptom of being in an inflamed state. And there is no one intervention to damp down inflammation in the body. Of course, the single most important thing is to do a ketogenic carnivore diet, because sugar drives inflammation, so does the upper fermenting gut. But there are other natural interventions that you can put in place. And you might like to look at the Coimbra protocol. Now, Coimbra is a wonderful, Dr. Cicero Coimbra, he's a wonderful doctor from Brazil, and he explains how vitamin D, it's actually not a vitamin, it's actually a hormone. It's the most important anti-inflammatory vitamin in the body. He starts his patients off and where they've got autoimmunity or multiple sclerosis or, whatever, on 1,000 IU of vitamin D per kilogram of body weight. Now, I like all my patients to take at least 10,000 IU of vitamin D. If you're not consuming any dairy products, it's perfectly safe to take 20,000 IU vitamin D. Dr. Coimbra starts his patients on 40, 50, 60, 70,000 international units of vitamin D every day. Now, only possible toxicity of vitamin D is you can get a high serum adjusted calcium. So hypercalcemia is the only possible side effect. Interestingly, in his patient group, he says this occurs in less than 1% of them doing his protocols. And if you look up Coimbra, he gives the protocols, online. But I like my patients to check their serum adjusted calcium every month, and so long as it's stable and they're gradually improving, then maybe every 3 months or every 6 months. But high dose vitamin D is a brilliant tool for damping down inflammation. Vitamin C is also anti-inflammatory. Iodine is also anti-inflammatory. Being happy and jolly is also anti-inflammatory. CBD oil is anti-inflammatory. Low dose naltrexone is anti-inflammatory. So all these are tools that anybody can access and work to damp down the inflammation generally in the body. And then you will find with time you'll become less irritable, or the immune system is less irritable, and you'll become more tolerant and maybe better able to consume those other foods.
Okay, so I help midlife women. And so we work on mindset for sure. I call it perspective because, when we shift that, we can totally change our lives just on the way we think. But I wanted to talk to you about not only the histamine, but I have gone through adrenal issues where my body is just muscle wasting. And I'm noticing lots of changes. It's been going on for a little while. After I went to Mexico and lived 3 hours earlier for 30 days and other things happened, it has not really bounced. I have not been able to bounce back from that. And I've done grounding. I go outside 5 times a day and I'm exposed to the sun, and I go to bed at a decent hour. It's better than it was. But I'm practicing so many things. So I'm curious, is there a way to reverse muscle wasting and improve body composition?
Well, muscle wasting, of course, is an inevitable part of the aging process. And sarcopenia, as it's called, is a major risk factor for death, because if you get weak, then you fall over and you break bones. So the way I explain life to people is life is not a battle, it's a war. It's a war we have to fight for life. It's a war we have to fight harder as we age. And it's a war that we know we're going to lose eventually. So as we age, we have to work harder to stay fit. Are we connected now? It looks like something's gone wrong. Tell me when you want me to start talking again. Now, let me just turn the lights on so it shouldn't get dark in here.
2, 3, 7, 8.
Sorry about that. Didn't know what happened there. But we were talking about sarcopenia. Okay. So as we age, yes, we lose muscle. And as I say to all my patients, life is not a battle, it's a war. It's a war we have to fight harder as we age. It's a war we know we're going to lose. But if I lose it when I'm 100, then I'll settle for that. And so there is a tendency to lose muscle as we age. So we have to work harder at exercise in order to maintain our muscle mass. And there are 3 types of exercise we need to do. We need to do strengthening power exercises. And you don't have to do these every day, but you need to do 90 seconds of intense exercise, like a plank, like a horse stance, isometric exercise or press ups, and then 90 seconds rest. So we're exercising our arm muscles, our leg muscles, and our core muscles. So you can usually do that with 4 exercises. and say 90 seconds of intensity, no pain, no gain. You do it until your muscles, they're aching and they're failing. You think, oh, I can't do another second of this. That's the first type of exercise you need to do. And then we need to do just, getting out into the fresh air, walking the dog, pottering in the garden, doing stuff like that, because that's so good for our mental health and our flexibility. And then the third type of exercise we need to do is bouncing, skipping or rebounding, because that protects us from osteoporosis. So an example of this is when astronauts go up into space, the reason they can't stay up there very long is because they get severe osteoporosis, because there's no gravity going through their bones. But if we skip or bounce up and down on a little trampoline, if the joints don't like it bouncing on the floor, bouncing up and down, that puts gravity, changing gravitational waves through our bones, and that stimulates the laydown of new bone. So I reckon that you have to be disciplined, do those 3 exercises, walking or stretching or gardening every day, isometric exercises, power exercises, 12 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and then rebounding. And that keeps us physically strong and tip-top shape to stand the vicissitudes of aging.
So what about for someone who goes through adrenal fatigue and they just start losing body composition rapidly and their cortisol is like tested and it's really, really high? Can they get that back?
Well,
How
that's
can
not
they work
adrenal
on that?
fatigue. If the cortisol is
Okay.
high, that means they are in a stress state, and they're responding that by pouring out adrenaline and cortisol and DHEA. So that's not adrenal fatigue. That means they're in a stress state. So we have to look at the causes of that stress and address those. Adrenal fatigue occurs when the cortisol levels are low and the DHEA levels are low. So the adrenal gland can't, gear up to deal with stress. And probably the most physiological treatment to take for that would be adrenal glandulars. As either whole adrenal extract, which is cortex and medulla, which contains the adrenaline hormones, or maybe adrenal cortex if you don't tolerate the medullary hormones. The treatment of the underactive adrenal gland is not as well defined as the treatment of the underactive thyroid. The underactive thyroid is very, very clear. It's very obvious what you have to do. The parameters are obvious. It's not so clear with the adrenal. It's a much more a case of suck it and see. But taking adrenal glandulars is a great start. And of course, remember, when you eat carnivore, you are consuming thyroid hormones and adrenal hormones from that animal, because those hormones are throughout the body. And it's certainly been my experience that some patients who have been taking dose of thyroid and adrenal can get away with less when they're on a meat-heavy diet.
Okay, so does the thyroid and the adrenals affect each other and cause like dysregulation?
Of course, well, not directly, but the dance that they do, and they're intimately linked. As I say, the thyroid is the accelerator of the accelerator pedal of our engines. That determines how fast our mitochondria go. But what the adrenal glands do, and this is a very important function from an evolutionary perspective, is they match energy requirements to energy delivery. Because what would have controlled populations in our evolutionary past was food supply. We couldn't afford to waste a gram of food. And so the adrenal, we have to be intrinsically lazy so we don't go and spend energy wastefully. But the adrenal glands allow us to gear up and spend more energy in response to demand. So if you are starving and there is a bison on the horizon, you are going to have maximum output of adrenaline and cortisol and DHEA. Your mitochondria are going to be going 3 or 4 times faster than normal in order that you can hunt down and kill that animal for the tribe. The whole tribe will be at it, and then you will survive to live another day. But by contrast, when food is abundant, then the adrenal glands say, and let's shut down energy delivery. We don't energy requirements. We don't need to spend energy because there's lots on that tree just there. All you have to do is lie under it and open your mouth, and so the adrenal gland will shut down. So it's our gearbox. It allows us to spend our energy very wisely and very economically, because we cannot afford to waste any energy, and certainly we can't afford to waste any food.
So how would they find the supplements that you've talked about, and how much fat should they be eating?
Well, you can't eat too much fat.
So fat doesn't make you fat?
No. And the important thing about fat is it satisfies the gut hormones. And so you eat fat, and then you don't want to have any more. Your appetite is satisfied. This illustrates the problem of ultra-processed foods. And I'll tell you the story of ultra-processed foods, which started with the tobacco companies in the 1950s and the 1960s and the 1970s. And the tobacco companies, obviously, smoking is addictive, and they had teams of scientists doing research to make tobacco more addictive. And they achieved that by putting sugar in it, by putting extra nicotine in it, and various flavors and whatever. And then in the 1970s, the science came through, so showing that tobacco is very dangerous for us. It causes heart disease and cancer and dementia and clogs up our arteries and all that. And people started to smoke less, and they could see their profits starting to diminish. And at that point, they bought up the food companies, and they asked their scientists to turn their attention to food to make food more addictive. And those scientists worked out that, for food to be addictive, it's got to have just the right, feel in the mouth, the right crunch factor, that umami, the amount of sugar, the amount of salt, and they came up with ultra-processed foods. And ultra-processed foods are horribly addictive because they feel so good in the mouth, but they don't fool the gut hormones. So we eat the foods, it feels good in the mouth, it's got the right flavors and textures and all that, we swallow it, and the gut hormone says, well, that was a load of rubbish you just consumed, try and have something else that we really need, and you just go back and eat more ultra-processed foods. So it's the gut hormones that tell us when to stop eating. There's another fascinating phenomenon called protein leverage, and this illustrates how we have an appetite for protein. And when that protein appetite is satisfied, then we stop eating. So experiments were initially done on insects, where they gave insects, normal protein, low protein, and high protein diets. The animals with a normal protein diet ate normal amounts of food. The animals on high protein diets found their protein appetite was satisfied very quickly, and they all lost weight. By contrast, the animals that were on low protein diet kept on eating until the protein appetite was satisfied, and then they stopped. But in doing so, they overate and they got fat. So, there are many determinants of appetite, but the one that fools our appetite most are the wretched processed foods. Horribly addictive. I wouldn't dare have them in the house because I know I would get addicted to them.
So, how much protein should a woman be eating? Is it like 1 gram per pound of body weight she wants to weigh?
That wouldn't be far off. No, that would be a bit much. It's more like a 1 gram per kilogram, 1.5 grams per kilogram. In my book, The Paleo Ketogenic Diet, that's this one. There are chapters in there which allow you to calculate your protein intake. But the point is, you don't have to be too anal about this. You don't have to be too, because the body does it for you. I mean, did primitive woman go out and say, oh, I've had this much protein, that much fat, or I better have a bit? No, of course she didn't. She just went out there and hunted and ate what was there. And you look at the figures of primitive peoples, and they're muscled and they're slim and they're active. So, they know what to do instinctively. So it's only us modern people that need to, do a bit of a check on those figures, maybe. That's the joy of being carnivore. That's the joy of being, paleo ketogenic. You don't have to worry too much about that because, our bodies tell us how much we need, whether we crave salt or protein or fat or whatever. And say we can't talk about craving sugar because that's an addiction, and so that we have to use a different language when we're dealing with sugars.
So, what do you wish you would have known before you started carnivore? And what's one tip you could give a midlife woman today to help her start or restart carnivore?
I think the most important thing that people need to do is recognize the addictive potential of sugars, carbohydrates, and ultra-processed foods. And once they appreciate that they are an addiction, we all know how to deal with addiction, don't we? I mean, alcoholics, they celebrate complete abstinence. They know they daren't have, a glass of wine or a gin and tonic because they'll be away, they'll be addicted again. And so it is with sugars and carbohydrates. And, I'm as good an addict as any. My parents died from alcohol-related diseases, but we're all potential addicts. And it's switched on by having a bit of that addictive thing. So once they recognize that, then they can rationalize, it's not they're being greedy. It's not that they lack self-control. It's not that they can't resist hunger. It's all about addiction. And when you get that firmly implanted in there and you just go for the non-addictive foods, then life becomes so much simpler.
So where can women find you and find out more about your work? And can you work with people? Like, do you work worldwide with people or only in the UK?
Well, I've got so overwhelmed with work at the moment. I'm not seeing any new patients. But I have a website. Most of my information is on there. obviously I've written 7 or 8 books. There's another one coming out shortly about diagnostic processes and tests. So there are the books, there's the website, and then I run online Zooms where I chat away all day. And then I have workshop weekends where I train, teach people, and they come to my house and I talk for 3 days, believe it or not. And then what I do is now run retreats where people can come here for a week, and I have a hyperbaric oxygen chamber and sauna and hot tub and eco pool, and we obviously eat a meat heavy paleo ketogenic diet, and I teach people all the techniques they need to get themselves well. Because the point here is there's not enough you and me's to go round, and this is why the emphasis has to be I have to give people, as I call it, the rules of the game and the tools of the trade so they can do it themselves, because their doctor ain't going to do it for them.
Thank you so much for coming on my podcast today. I'm very excited to share you with all of my listeners and my YouTube channel. And I will have your links. So send them to me. I'll have your links in the description below. And I'm looking forward to listening to you more and learning more about you. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christina.
You're welcome.